A good portion of Fallout 4's writing is centered around synths. It dares to ask the deeply philosophical question: if pretentious Harvard graduates make synthetic people and then enslave them, is that bad? The Commonwealth is a deeply uninteresting place thanks to how Bethesda establishes this setting. The world of Fallout 4 feels so self-contained, and I think that's its main problem. The NCR is probably the most significant faction in the entire American continent in the Fallout universe, and they are mentioned in Fallout 4 twice. Once by Kellogg, and again in an easy-to-miss note. Caesar's Legion, on the other hand, is mentioned 0 times. I can only imagine that Bethesda is embarrassed that Obsidian took their property and made a way more interesting setting than they could in a paltry 18 months. I bring this up because the factions in the setting of Bethesda's Fallout seem to be made assuming the bombs were dropped, like, a few decades ago. There's not a lot of solidified powers, and those that do exist are either crumbling or not very stable. Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4 are set 200 years after nuclear war. That is generations of time. Nations rise a lot faster than that. There should be 200 years of history, but instead it's treated as if there's barely any to speak of. History and established beef is what made New Vegas so interesting. It wasn't a story about people rebuilding civilization that had already happened. There is a straight-up government with a democratically elected president. New Vegas was about a set of interesting political dynamics that uses the post-apocalypse as a backdrop rather than the entire focus. In honest hearts, the player interacts with numerous different tribes, and it felt like Obsidian put a lot of effort into making them feel storied and rich. They misquote idioms of the old world.
What's the phrase? House, sweet house.
Are baffled by capitalism.
There can't really be a place where people go into big buildings and give away all their money just to watch someone flip paper squares on a table.
My absolute favorite example, though, has to be Follow's Chalk referring to the NCR as...
to a tribe called NCR.
Because it makes a lot of sense on multiple levels. Firstly, their society doesn't really have any concrete understanding of what a big civilization would be like, and so they don't think it's wrong to refer to them as a tribe. Secondly, Joshua Graham would probably have been pretty hesitant to talk about who the NCR are, thanks to his history. He probably would have mentioned them in passing, and the tribes would have had to piece together what they could. None of the water in Zion is even irradiated. This genuinely feels like a society that is somewhat plausible. Fallout 4 is quite lacking in comparison. Everything that's mentioned in Fallout 4 is going on inside Boston. There are basically no mentions of anything happening outside the playable space, and no, the DLCs don't count. It makes everything feel a lot less grand or impactful. Nuking the NCR and or the Legion in Lonesome Road was not something that you saw happen, but because those powers were so established in the base game, you felt it had massive implications for the future of those nations, because they're established with far-reaching spheres of influence from Northern California to Southern New Mexico. Here, the Institute only operates in Boston, the Railroad only cares about the Institute, the Brotherhood left their position in the Capital Wasteland to do nothing except come to Boston.
We are the Brotherhood of Steel.
And the Minutemen and Gunners are only ever mentioned as being present in Boston. You can blame cut content for why everything in this game feels so half-baked, and you'd be right. But I'm a lot less quick to forgive because there was a certain other game which was also insanely rushed and pushed out the door before it was finished. New Vegas had governments vying for control of an autonomous city-state at the core of its plot. They were two massive established powers with large amounts of influence and things going on. Fallout 4's factions desperately need that depth, and oh boy do they not have it. One of the Commonwealth's 4 major factions you can end the game with has a total of 1 sentence of backstory told to you in the first hour. They used to keep people safe, and now they're down to some losers with stupid crank muskets because all the people with actual charisma died in Quincy. As a faction, they're barely a power either. There's no central government or laws or really anything to go off of. The Commonwealth Provisional Government mentioned a few times in-game could have been an interesting player in Boston's political landscape in place of the Minutemen, but their inclusion in the lore at all is literally just there to make the Institute feel like mustache-twirling villains.
Years back, a group of settlements tried to get together and form a coalition. Every settlement with even a hint of clout sent representatives to try and hash out an agreement. Only the Institute sent a representative of their own, a Synth. The man killed every rep at the talks.
The other 3 major factions apart from the Minutemen are as follows. You have the Brotherhood of Steel, a very well-established military presence who wants to safeguard people from dangerous technology.
No one brings that much firepower without plans to use it.
There's the Institute, who are basically the Illuminati, Shadow replacing people with synthetic versions of themselves for no well-explained reason. They're cartoonishly evil, and I don't know why. Their moral compass is on the same level as if I built my Roomba to be sentient and then vehemently denied there's anything wrong with that.
Our new synths are so lifelike, I keep mistaking them for real people.
And lastly are the Railroad, who just want to help and free runaway synths from the Institute. That's it. They're like 8 guys in a basement. That's it, that's the faction. Having them as a major faction is like portraying the Underground Railroad as a comparable power to the Union and the Confederacy. Well, there is a 5th faction. In what is perhaps the most blatant cut content I've ever seen, the Gunners are a group that is clearly meant to be available as another choice. They're a group of highly militarized mercenaries who seem to be Enclave adjacent owing to their US Army ranking system. They're hostile to every other faction in the game, and despite being mercenaries, they're hostile to player as well. Unfortunately, they don't even walk around in the cool tactical gear you see in this footage. If they at least looked cool, that could have made up for it, but instead they look like Green Raiders. Their immediate hostility is extra baffling because the masculine protagonist is a US Army vet. It would obviously make sense for them to join the faction closest to their past life, while also giving players an insight into the Enclave, that is, assuming they are related. And considering how much Bethesda loves their Infinite Radiant quests, I'm surprised they passed up the mercenary group with no morals as an excuse to give you quests to go places and shoot the things which live there. Something I am astonished Fallout never brings up is how you, on the regular, kill entire groups of people on site who are doing nothing except living their lives because your Pip-Boy marked them as red. Yes, Raiders. New Vegas never did this as far as I know. All of the Raider-adjacent groups that you fight in that game are tied to a faction or a small group, like the Fiends. There wasn't just generic Raider because it's inherently an unsustainable lifestyle. So, the Sole Survivors faction options are as follows. Some people in a basement, a random loose collection of settlers, or the Yale graduates who are in control of the entire Commonwealth from the shadows, capable of replacing anyone at any time with no one being the wiser, with their own personal army of Blade Runner Terminators, or lastly, the people who descended from the sky in their blimp and planes to take to the streets with power armor and Gatling lasers.
You don't look much like a soldier to me.
Now given those options, Desdemona really better hope she's written a will by now. The Railroad ending is equivalent to the race to Berlin being won by the Falkland Islands. The Railroad should be a side faction with significant importance who informs your character's opinion on synths and their general moral compass. Here's how this probably should work. If you wipe out the Railroad, then whichever faction you actually side with hates synths. The Brotherhood consider them technological abominations, the Minutemen turn them away.
If you ever need anything, you stop by at the office.
Sure, you got it. Thanks, Nick. Hey there. You keep that synth freak at arm's length. You understand me?
And the Institute continue enslaving them. If you keep them around and do their quests, the Brotherhood accept that maybe genocide is bad, the Minutemen welcome them freely, and the Institute realizes that maybe enslaving sentient people is bad. Just to hammer this point home, so much of this game is centered around the question of synths' rights when the answer is so incredibly obvious. Even the Gen 1 and 2 synths are capable of self-preservation and not needlessly causing suffering.
I will limit the pain I inflict, if possible.
They're described several times as being identical to humans, and plenty of synths like Dance don't even know that they're synths. Boy, I wonder if they should be treated like humans. For clarity, I don't think the people of the Wasteland being wary of synths is unrealistic. If anything, Bethesda probably underplayed how bigoted people can be. The player, though, is given unique insight into them from the 4th synth companions, their son being the basis for all human-like synths, chats with Institute scientists, and speaking with members of the Railroad and escaped synths. Unless the Sole Survivor actually has D20 IQ, I can't really imagine a universe where they give the go-ahead on fucking genocide. Admittedly, I'm a little embarrassed to say that I sided with the Brotherhood in my first playthrough, but in my defense, I was 13. And a little more focus on the cool power armor than any philosophical discussion. Character writing has also noticeably taken a dive. You can tell people's disposition to the entirety of Caesar's Legion based on whether they say Caesar or Kaiser, which itself sounds a hell of a lot like Kaiser, meaning king. There is nothing with that level of subtlety in Fallout 4. Joshua Graham is basically the main character of Honest Hearts in New Vegas, and he knew Caesar when he was still Edward Sallow. If you ask Graham how he became Sallad's legate, he replies,
"This way lies the path to hell. Caesar needed me to translate. Translation became giving orders. Giving orders became leading in battle. Leading in battle became training, punishing, terrorizing. A series of small mistakes before a great fall."
In just a few lines, he explains how Caesar's Legion came to be, how he gained his position in it, the atrocities he committed, the degree to which Edward is a psychopath, and how much he regrets his choices. In Fallout 4, Elder Maxon is the leader of the Brotherhood because, he was in Fallout 3, I guess. And he's now a massive racist, but that's on brand for the Brotherhood. Despite how much the Brotherhood repeatedly say that the player needs to learn what their whole MO is about, you can show up on the Pridwin, repeatedly tell off the Brotherhood at every opportunity, literally tell Maxon that you don't give a shit about or believe in any Brotherhood ideals and cannot be convinced otherwise, and he'll still knight you right afterwards.
You're not gonna convince me you're right.
Therefore, from this moment forward, I'm granting you the rank of knight.
When you meet Father for the first time, you can full-on confront him and be like, dude, you were doing super fucked up shit for no reason, and he hits you with that classic centrist whataboutism. He literally goes, "Yes, well, but what about the people that helped you get here? You hate society and yet you participate in it. What a fool you have proven yourself to be." This meeting also comes 10 to 20 hours into your playthrough. Deciding to play an Institute run means you have to trudge through 3/4 of the entire game before you meet them. Their quests, ironically, railroad you so unbelievably hard that it's not even funny. You can disagree with your own son at literally every turn, and it doesn't matter. "Father, the railroad is doing what is objectively right." "No, we must take back our property and teach them a lesson." Even after he dies of super cancer and you become director of the Institute, you can't stop the Institute from being comic book villains. Now, Caesar too was a horrible person, but there's a big difference between him and Father. Caesar is a megalomaniac psychopath, but he excuses his actions with flawed logic and bullshit philosophical discussions about Hegelian dialectics and what's effectively destiny. He's written in a way that's really, really hard to accomplish. He's intentionally written to act like he's trying to sound smart. If this was done worse, like if they tried to make him badass and suave, it would have probably come off like the writers crowbarring their super awesome self-insert Caesar cosplayer into the story while trying to make him come off as super cool. But because he's arrogant as all fuck,
how do I put this basically enough,
and contextualize alongside his legion being a bunch of regressive traditionalists that basically everyone hates, Caesar comes off as insane and delusional rather than completely out of place. If you don't really know what he's talking about and you don't really think about it, you might think he's some sort of genius, but if you actually dig into what he's saying, it's pretty clear that he's completely lost it. Father, on the other hand, does not have any actual argument behind the actions he's defending. He just says,
"The world is not what it used to be,"
and moves on. Funnily enough, now that I think about it, the only reason the Railroad, Brotherhood, or Minutemen are even remotely morally acceptable as faction choices is because the Institute was so poorly written. If they weren't so comedically evil, there'd be no reason not to go for them. This is big speculation territory, but I suspect that the reason it's like this is because Obsidian Bethesda took completely different approaches to writing their factions. Obsidian, when coming up for the idea for future Rome cosplayers, thought, what would make someone insane enough to actually put a society like this together? And so made them a cult of personality led by a nerd-turned-megalomaniac, which is nothing but destined to crumble. Bethesda, on the other hand, wanted a cool plot twist and went, what if your son was the leader of the boogeymen? And that's it. A better question to ask would have been, why are the boogeymen the boogeymen? Well, that's the main plot's character writing. Fallout 4 actually has really, really good companions. They're a lot better than the ones from previous games in a ton of ways. The most noticeable and omnipresent being that they actually feel like companions. Practically all of the companions comment on dialogue choices all of the time, and it feels like you actually have someone with you weighing their thoughts in from time to time, instead of them just being one of many different identical robots with different combat voice lines.
No thanks.
Companions in New Vegas did occasionally comment on things, but only very rarely and with little actual back and forth conversation. The direction in Fallout 4 absolutely carries them too. I think Bethesda deserves endless shit for having 4 people voice half of their games, but they certainly could have picked a lot worse than Steven Russell.
Well, I'm not sure if anyone told you, but there's been a war. Nothing big. I think we'll bounce back just fine.
Nick is probably the best companion in any Bethesda game, and Russell's delivery elevates him all the more. His companion quest is weirdly padded and it seems unfinished, but the speech he gives at the end of it is really good.
I remember getting the call to head to some lab in Cambridge to get that neurotrans whatever. And the next thing I know, I'm in a trash heap. My family, my home, my entire life gone. Then I discover all those things that they weren't even mine. Everything I ever was belonged to Nick. I'd hoped with winter gone, the last hint of that old world snuffed out, I could finally be free. But being out here with you, what I finally realized after all this time was that taking down winter, it wasn't about Nick or Jenny or even you or me. It was about justice, about doing what's right. And that act of goodness, that's ours. All the good we've done, that's ours, and ours alone. And even if that's the only thing in this world that I can ever claim as mine, not Nick's, not the Institute's, but mine, then I can die happy.
I always find myself wanting to travel around with Codsworth at the beginning of the game, but then have to choose from the plethora of even better companions, which is the best kind of problem to have. I'm kind of convinced that the people who wrote the companions must have been on a different plane of existence than the rest of the team, because they stick out that much as being way better than the rest of the game.
You still want to travel with me?
Yeah, I think I could suffer through it.
A handful of the moments in the story are like this too, and the one that sticks out the most to me being that one part in Kellogg's memories, which never fails to pull me in.
I never knew why we didn't just refreeze the rest of them, but we had our orders. Guess the old man didn't want so many loose ends.
Then, literally right afterwards, you get told to go to what's effectively literal hell and speak with some radiation cultists, and you're like, oh, right, I'm playing a video game. Oh, the gameplay, yeah, it's fun. The focus on settlement building was a mistake. If this game taught me anything, it's that even if Fallout 5 is coming in 2028, it will still be unfinished.
Hey, chin up. I know the night just got darker, but it won't last forever.